Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Slaughterhouse-Five. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and remind you that if you are thinking about donating, we have two ways to do so. I have a Patreon account, which is a monthly, month-to-month donation system. And then I have a Ko-fi account, which can do much the same, but also allows you to make single one-time donations. But if you are, I'll have links to both in the description box. But as I said, if you are in financial trouble or donating would put you there, please do not donate. I'd rather you take care of what you need to take care of. It's tough enough on everybody right now, especially with the morons in charge. But if you are in a financially good spot and you wish to donate, thank you. I appreciated it. It's me, myself, and I do all the research, filming, editing, posting, all that good stuff. I've personally sworn off doing commercials and I make no money from the videos as of yet. With all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the book here, starting with Chapter 3. The Germans and the dog were engaged in a military operation, which had an amazingly self-explanatory name. A human enterprise, which is seldom described in detail, whose name alone, when reported as news or history, gives many war enthusiasts a sort of post-coital satisfaction. It is in the imagination of combat fans the divinely listless love play that follows the orgasm of victory. It is called mopping up. The dog, who had sounded so ferocious in the winter distances, was a female German shepherd. She was shivering. Her tail was between her legs. She had been borrowed that morning from a farmer. She had never been to war before. She had no idea what game was being played. Her name was Princess. Two of the Germans were boys in their early teens. Two were ramshackle old men, droolers as toothless as carp. They were irregulars, armed and clothed fragmentarily with junk taken from real soldiers who were newly dead. So it goes. They were farmers from just across the German border, not far away. Their commander was a middle-aged corporal, red-eyed, scrawny, tough as dried beef, sick of war. He had been wounded 4 times and patched up and sent back to war. He was a very good soldier, about to quit and find somebody to surrender to. His bandy legs were thrust into golden cavalry boots, which he had taken from a dead Hungarian colonel on the Russian front. So it goes. Those boots were almost all he owned in this world. They were his home. An anecdote. One time a recruit was watching him bone and wax those golden boots, and he held up one, and the recruit to the recruit and said, "If you look in there deep enough, you'll see Adam and Eve." Billy Pilgrim had not heard this anecdote, but lying on the black ice there, Billy stared into the patina of the corporal's boots, saw Adam and Eve in the golden depths. They were naked. They were so innocent, so vulnerable, so eager to behave decently. Billy Pilgrim loved them. Next to the golden boots were a pair of feet which were swaddled in rags. They were crisscrossed by canvas straps, were shod in hinged wooden clogs, and Billy looked up at the face that went with the clogs. It was the face of a blonde angel, of a 15-year-old boy. The boy was as beautiful as Eve. Billy was helped to his feet by the lovely boy, by the heavenly androgen, and the others came forward to dust the snow off Billy, and then they searched him for weapons. He didn't have any. The most dangerous thing they found on his person was a 2-inch pencil stub. 3 inoffensive bangs came from far away. They came from German rifles. The 2 scouts who had ditched Billy and Weary had just been shot. They had been lying in ambush for Germans. They had been discovered and shot from behind. Now they were dying in the snow, feeling nothing, turning the snow to a color of raspberry sherbet. So it goes. So Roland Weary was the last of the 3 musketeers. And Weary, bug-eyed with terror, was being disarmed. The corporal gave Weary's pistol to the pretty boy. He marveled at Weary's cruel trench knife, and the German said in German that Weary would no doubt like to use the knife on him to tear his face off with the spiked knuckles, to stick the blade into his belly or throat. He spoke no English, and Billy and Weary understood no German. "Nice playthings you have," the corporal said to Weary, and he handed the knife to an old man. "Isn't that a pretty thing? Hmm?" He tore open Weary's overcoat and blouse. Brass buttons flew like popcorn. The corporal reached into Weary's gaping bosom as though he meant to tear out his pounding heart, but he brought out Weary's bulletproof Bible instead. A bulletproof Bible is a Bible small enough to be slipped into a soldier's breast pocket, over his heart, and it is sheathed in steel. The corporal found the dirty picture of the woman and the pony in Weary's hip pocket. "What a lucky pony, eh?" he said. Hmm? Don't you wish that you were that pony?" He handed the picture to the other old men. "Spoils of war. It's yours, all yours, you lucky lad." Then he made Weary sit down in the snow and take off his combat boots, which he gave to the beautiful boy. He gave Weary the boy's clogs, so Weary and Billy were both without decent military footwear now, and they had to walk for miles and miles with Weary's clogs clacking, with Billy bobbing up and down, crashing into Weary from time to time. "Excuse me," Billy would say, or "I beg your pardon." They were brought at last to a stone cottage at the fork in the road, and it was a collecting point for prisoners of war. Billy and Weary were taken inside, where it was warm and smoky. There was a fire sizzling and popping in the fireplace. The fuel was furniture. There were about 20 other Americans in there, sitting on the floor with their backs to the wall, staring into the flames, thinking whatever there was to think, which was zero. Nobody talked. Nobody had any good war stories to tell. Billy and Weary found places for themselves, and Billy went to sleep with his head on the shoulder of an unprotesting captain. The captain was a chaplain. He was a rabbi. He had been shot through the hand. Billy traveled in time, opened his eyes, and found himself staring into the glass eyes of a jade green mechanical owl. The owl was hanging upside down from a rod of stainless steel. It was Billy's optometer in his office in Ilium. An optometer is an instrument for measuring refractive errors in the eyes in order to that corrective lenses may be prescribed. Billy had fallen asleep while examining a patient who was in a chair at the other side of the owl. He had fallen asleep at work before, and it had been funny at first. Now Billy was starting to get worried about it, about his mind in general. He tried to remember how old he was. Couldn't. He tried to remember what year it was. He couldn't remember that either. "Doctor?" said the patient tentatively. "Hmm?" he said. "You're so quiet." "Sorry, you were talking away there and then you got so quiet." Um, you see something terrible?" "Terrible? Some disease in my eyes?" "No, no," said Billy, wanting to doze again. "Your eyes are fine. You just need glasses for reading." He told her to go across the corridor and see the wide selection of frames there. When she was gone, Billy opened the drapes and was no wiser to what was outside. The view was still blocked by a Venetian blind, which he hoisted clatteringly. Bright sunlight came crashing in. There were thousands of parked automobiles out there, twinkling in the on a vast lake of blacktop. Billy's office was part of a suburban shopping center. Right outside the window was Billy's own Cadillac Eldorado Coupe de Ville. He read the stickers on the bumper. "Visit Ausable Chasm," said one. "Support your police department," said another. There was a third. "Impeach Earl Warren," it said. The stickers about the police and Earl Warren were gifts from Billy's father-in-law, a member of the John Birch Society. The date on the license plate was 1967, which would make Billy Pilgrim 44 years old. He asked himself this: where have all the years gone? Billy turned his attention to the desk. There was an open copy of the Review of Optometry there. It was open to an editorial which Billy now read, his lips moving slightly. "What happens in 1968 will be the fate of European optometrists for at least 50 years, Billy read. With the warning, Jean Feriart, secretary of the National Union of Belgian Opticians, is pressing for formation of a European optometry society. The alternatives, he says, will be the obtaining of professional status or by 1971 reduction to the row of spectacle sellers. Billy Pilgrim tried hard to care. A siren went off, scared the hell out of him. He was expecting World War III at any time. The siren was simply announcing high noon. It was housed in a cupola atop the firehouse across the street from Billy's office. Billy closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was back in World War II again. His head was on the wounded rabbi's shoulder. A German was kicking his feet, telling him to wake up, that it was time to move on. The Americans, with Billy among them, formed a fool's parade on the road outside. There was a photographer present, a German war correspondent with a Leica. He took pictures of Billy's and Roland Weary's feet. The picture was widely published 2 days later as heartening evidence of how miserably equipped the American Army often was, despite the reputation for being rich. The photographer wanted something more lively, though, a picture of an actual capture, so the guards staged one for him. They threw Billy into shrubbery, and when Billy came out of the shrubbery, his face wreathed in goofy goodwill, they menaced him with the machine pistols, as though they were capturing him then. Billy's smile as he came out of the shrubbery was at least as peculiar as Mona Lisa's, for he was simultaneously on foot in Germany in 1944 and riding his Cadillac in 1967. Germany dropped away and 67 became bright and clear, free of interference from any other time. Billy was on his way to a Lions Club luncheon meeting. It was a hot August, but Billy's car was air-conditioned. He was stopped by a signal in the middle of Ilium's black ghetto. The people who lived here hated it so much that they had burned down a lot of it a month before. It was all they had, and they'd wrecked it. The neighborhood reminded Billy of some of the towns he had seen in the war. The curbs and sidewalks were crushed in many places, showing where the National Guard tanks and half-tracks had been. "Blood, brother," was a message written in pink paint on the side of the shattered grocery store. There was a tap on Billy's car window. A black man was out there. He wanted to talk about something. The light had changed, and Billy did the simplest thing. He drove on. Billy drove through some of the greater desolation. It looked like Dresden after it was firebombed, like the surface of the moon. The house where Billy had grown up used to be somewhere in what was so empty now. This was urban renewal. A new Ilium Government Center and a pavilion of the arts and a peace lagoon and high-rise apartment buildings were going up here soon. That was all right with Billy Pilgrim. The speaker at Lions Club meeting was a major in the Marines. He said that Americans had no choice but to keep fighting in Vietnam until they achieved victory, or until the communists realized that they could not force their way of life on weak countries. The major had been there on 2 separate tours of duty. He told him many terrible and wonderful things he had seen. He was in favor of increased bombing, of bombing North Vietnam back into the Stone Age if it refused to see reason. Billy was not moved to protest the bombing of North Vietnam, did not shudder about the hideous things he himself had seen bombing do. He was simply having lunch with the Lions Club, of which he was part president or past president now. Billy had a framed prayer on the office wall, which expressed his mood to keep going, even though he was unenthusiastic about living. A lot of patients who saw the prayer on Billy's wall told him that it helped them to keep going too. It went like this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom always to tell the difference. Among the things Billy Pilgrim could not change were the past, the present, and the future. Now he was being introduced to the Marine Major. The person who was performing the introduction was telling the Major that Billy was a veteran and that Billy had a son who was a sergeant in the Green Berets in Vietnam. The Major told Billy that the Green Berets were doing a great job and that he should be proud of his son. I am. I certainly am, said Billy Pilgrim. He went home for a nap after lunch. He was under doctor's orders to take a nap every day. The doctor hoped that this would relieve a complaint that Billy had. Every so often, for no apparent reason, Billy Pilgrim would find himself weeping. Nobody had ever caught Billy doing it, only the doctor knew. It was the most extremely quiet thing Billy did, and not very moist. Billy owned a lovely Georgian home in Ilium. He was rich as Croesus, something he had never expected to be, not in a million years. He had 5 other optometrists working for him in the shopping plaza location and netted over $60,000 a year. In addition, he owned a fifth of the Holiday Inn on Route 54 and half of 3 Tasty Freeze stands. Tasty Freeze was a sort of frozen custard. It gave all the pleasure of ice cream could give without the stiffness and bitter coldness of ice cream. Billy's home was empty. His daughter Barbara was about to get married, and she and his wife had gone downtown to pick out patterns for her crystal and silverware. There was a note laying on the kitchen table. There were no servants. People just weren't interested in careers in domestic service anymore. There wasn't a dog either. There used to be a dog named Spot, but he died. So it goes. Billy had liked Spot a lot, and Spot had liked him. But that ends that particular um, piece of reading. So yeah, Billy Pilgrim still hopping back and forth in time, notably this time between 1967 as an optometrist and 1944 as a soldier in World War II. And we're seeing so much more of his day-to-day life, even though he's been influenced by so much he's been involved with, notably being a soldier in World War II in Germany. Was captured. What he had on him was taken to as supplies for the German captors, and he, along with several other Americans, were marched along to move further along. So yeah, um, but then it talks about his time in '67, almost like it's a doldrum compared to what he went through in the war, as if it's just so peaceful and quiet. He was making money, life was going relatively well for Billy. So yeah, um, talks about going to the ghetto, which, remember, this is 1967, 1 year before Dr. King is shot and killed. So the fight for civil rights has been going on, although there has been much more leaning into a much more ferocious and vicious form of fighting for civil rights. So yeah, but he talks about the effects on the ghetto, which didn't really leave the black neighborhood with much, but you could tell there was a bit of frustration with that alone, because he was talking about how it had been wrecked and everything, and yeah. If you don't give people much opportunity, they don't have much of a reason to keep what they have, because they're trying to survive. If you've got a wooden chair in the midst of winter but no shelter, you build a fire with that wooden chair. But yeah, um, and he talks about getting on pretty well, conversations with the Marine Major at the Lions Club, who was talking about what was going on in Vietnam. Again, we're looking at 1967. This is coming toward the end of Lyndon B. Johnson's term in office. The next year, um, Nixon would be elected in November. So yeah, again, a time of turmoil in America and overseas. But yeah, Billy's son is a Green Beret, and Billy's daughter is about to get married. And again, Billy seems to be doing okay, but the life just seems so empty, even with as well as he's doing. Because he talks about the problem with crying he has with his doctor. He says it's not loud, it's not even really that moist, so it's not producing a lot of tears, but occasional teardrop drops down, and he can probably feel himself sob when you're just sitting there, and you can feel, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, so even with the hopping back and forth in time, it's clear there's been an effect on Billy. It's a it's affected him. Life in general has affected him a lot. But with that said, we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources, and it can't be a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing sources or anecdotes thrown together to try to make sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.